Most people think Starbucks was always inevitable, as if it was destined to exist, as if the green logo was somehow written into history before it ever appeared on a street corner. But that story is comfortable, and comfort rarely tells the truth. The truth is, Starbucks almost never became what you know today. Not because the idea was weak, not because the timing was wrong, but because for a very long time, almost no one believed in the picture one man carried in his head, and even fewer were willing to pay for it. Before we talk about success, let me tell you something most people skip. Howard Schultz was not a prodigy. He was not born into power. He did not inherit connections. He didn't even create Starbucks in the beginning. He walked into it and almost walked away from it forever. When people say, believe in your vision, it sounds clean, motivational, easy to repeat. But when you actually live inside a vision that no one else can see, it feels lonely, unstable, and often embarrassing. Howard Schultz lived there for years. Pause for a moment and imagine this. You are standing in front of people with money, experience, authority. You describe something you've seen with your own eyes. Not a fantasy, not a dream, a real place, a real system, a real way of life. And they look at you like you're naive, like you don't understand how the world works. That was his reality. Before Starbucks became a third place, before it became culture, before it became routine for millions, it was just an idea that sounded impractical in America. Coffee was fuel, fast, cheap, disposable. No one lingered, no one gathered, no one paid extra for atmosphere. At least that's what everyone believed. Howard Schultz didn't grow up planning to challenge that belief. He wasn't trying to change consumer behavior. He was trying to make sense of his own life. He came from a background where stability was fragile, where one injury could erase income, where dignity depended on whether someone above you decided you mattered that day. That kind of upbringing does something to a person. It sharpens your awareness of systems, of who gets protected and who gets replaced. Years later, when people praised him for offering healthcare and stock options to part-time workers, they called it generous, visionary, progressive. But for him, it was personal, because he remembered what it felt like to watch his father lose everything without a safety net. He remembered the humiliation, the silence, the helplessness. Those memories don't fade, they wait. Now here's the part people misunderstand. Howard Schultz did not join Starbucks with a revolutionary plan. At first, he was impressed by craftsmanship, by quality, by pride in product. Starbucks back then didn't sell what you drink today. They sold beans, equipment, knowledge. No espresso bar, no phone mark, no names written on cups, just coffee, taken seriously. That alone was rare. But what changed everything wasn't Seattle, it wasn't America, it was Italy. When Schultz traveled there, he didn't just see cafes, he observed rhythm, human behavior, connection. He saw people stand at counters, not because they were in a rush, but because that's where life happened. Baristas weren't invisible, they were hosts, recognized, respected. The coffee wasn't the centerpiece. The interaction was. That experience didn't excite him, it unsettled him. Because once you see something like that, you can't unsee it. He came back carrying a clear picture in his mind. Not a business model, not projections, a feeling, a place between home and work, a space where people felt seen without being known deeply, a daily ritual that made ordinary life feel human. And this is where the real struggle began. When he tried to explain it, the words fell short. When he pitched it, numbers couldn't capture it. When he asked for support, logic worked against him. Investors didn't say he was stupid. That would have been easier. They said it wasn't scalable. They said Americans wouldn't pay for it. They said habits were already formed. Some smiled politely, others were blunt. More than once, he was told no by people who had every reason to be right. And here's the uncomfortable truth. At that moment, there was no proof they were wrong. This is where belief gets tested. Not when things are hard, but when things are uncertain. Hardship can be explained. Uncertainty cannot. Howard Schultz stood between two realities. One that existed on spreadsheets and one that existed only in his mind. He had to choose which one deserved his loyalty. This part of the story doesn't get applause. It doesn't sell books. It's repetitive, slow, draining, pitch, rejection, revision, rejection again. Not because the idea changed, but because the listener couldn't see it. People think rejection builds confidence. It doesn't. What it builds is endurance. and endurance is quieter than motivation. There were moments when he questioned himself, moments when security felt tempting, moments when staying employed seemed wiser than staying faithful to an idea. Those moments matter because vision without doubt is fiction. He wasn't fearless, he was committed. And commitment doesn't eliminate fear. It teaches you how to carry it without letting it steer. By the time Starbucks eventually became what it is today, people assumed clarity existed from the start. It didn't. What existed was persistence without validation. That's a dangerous place to live. It can either break you or shape you. In this first chapter of his journey, Howard Schultz didn't win. He didn't succeed. He didn't scale anything. He simply refused to let go of a picture no one else could see yet. And sometimes, that's the most difficult work of all. Because you're not fighting the market. You're not fighting competitors. You're fighting the pressure to abandon your own perception of what's possible. Take a breath here. Let that sink in. This story isn't about coffee. It never was. It's about what happens when a person decides that an unseen future deserves real-world sacrifice. And this is only the beginning. Before Howard Schultz ever stood in front of investors, before he argued about espresso bars or customer experience, his worldview had already been formed in a small apartment in Brooklyn. Not by ambition, by instability. He grew up watching his father work jobs that demanded strength but offered no protection. Truck driver, factory worker, delivery man. Work that paid just enough to survive, but not enough to feel safe. And then one winter day, his father slipped on ice and injured his ankle. That single moment erased the family's income. No compensation, no insurance, no fallback. Just silence. For a child, moments like that carve deep impressions. You learn very early that effort does not guarantee security. That loyalty to a company doesn't mean the company will remember you. That dignity, in many systems, is conditional. Howard didn't articulate these lessons back then. Children rarely do. But they store them. They store the tension in their bodies, the fear in their nervous systems, the quiet anger that has nowhere to go. Years later, when people asked him why he cared so much about employee benefits, he didn't answer with theory. He answered with memory. He knew what it felt like to watch a family fall apart because of a workplace injury. He knew what it meant to feel invisible to the system you depend on. That background matters because it explains why his vision for Starbucks was never only commercial. It was moral. Not in a loud way, not in a preachy way, in a practical, lived way. But before any of that, he had to get out. Education became the exit. Howard Schultz was the first in his family to attend college, not because it was expected, but because it was necessary. College wasn't a dream. It was a lifeline. He studied communications, not because it promised wealth, but because it promised mobility, the ability to speak, to persuade, to enter rooms where decisions were made. And yet, even after graduating, the sense of being an outsider never left him. He didn't come from money. He didn't talk like the executives around him. He didn't carry the quiet confidence that comes from knowing failure won't destroy you. That awareness sharpened him. When he entered the workforce, he paid attention to how companies treated people, not just customers, employees. He noticed which organizations saw workers as assets and which saw them as replaceable parts. Eventually, he landed a job selling kitchen equipment. Not glamorous, but it required travel, and travel changes perception. It was through this role that he first encountered Starbucks. At the time, it was a small company in Seattle, a handful of stores, focused on sourcing high-quality coffee beans. Nothing about it screamed empire, but something about it felt different. The people cared. They talked about coffee like artisans, not retailers. They respected the product. That respect resonated with him. So when he joined Starbucks as director of marketing, it wasn't because he foresaw global dominance. It was because he sensed integrity. This is important. He wasn't chasing a billion-dollar outcome. He was drawn to authenticity. But then Italy happened. And Italy didn't inspire him the way people imagine. It disrupted him. In Milan, he observed something America didn't have. Cafes weren't stops, they were anchors. People didn't rush in and out, they lingered, they greeted each other, they returned daily. The barista knew their names, their preferences, their moods. This wasn't luxury, it was routine. And that routine created belonging. Howard Schultz saw that and realized something uncomfortable. America lacked this space. There was home, there was work, and nothing in between that felt human. He came back energized and anxious at the same time, because he now carried a vision that didn't fit neatly into spreadsheets. When he proposed the idea of transforming Starbucks into a cafe experience, the response was cautious, not hostile, worse, skeptical. The founders didn't dismiss him out of ego. They dismissed the idea because it didn't align with their understanding of American behavior. They weren't wrong to question it. At the time, Americans drank coffee at home or at diners, cheap, fast, functional. The idea that people would pay more for ambiance sounded unrealistic, so when Schultz pushed harder, the resistance grew firmer. Eventually, he realized something painful. The place he admired wasn't ready for the future he saw. That realization forced a decision: stay loyal to the company or stay loyal to the vision. That kind of choice doesn't announce itself dramatically. It creeps in. It shows up as restlessness, frustration, late-night thoughts you can't silence. Leaving Starbucks wasn't an act of rebellion. It was an act of alignment. He stepped away to build his own cafe concept, a place inspired by Italy, a place centered on experience. And immediately, reality struck. Raising capital was brutal. Investors didn't see culture, they saw cost, they didn't see connection. They saw risk. Again and again, he was told variations of the same thing. It won't work here. Each rejection carried weight, not because of ego, but because he had bills, responsibilities, a growing family. This wasn't youthful experimentation. This was adult risk. There were nights when doubt felt rational, responsible even, but something kept pulling him forward. Not confidence, clarity. He knew exactly what he wanted to build, even if he couldn't prove it yet. Eventually, with persistence bordering on obsession, he secured enough funding to open a few stores. And then, unexpectedly, an opportunity emerged. The original Starbucks owners decided to sell. Suddenly, the company he left stood before him again. This time, as a possibility. He gathered investors, pitched relentlessly, asked people to bet not on data, but on belief. Many still refused, but enough said yes. When he acquired Starbucks and merged it with his vision, the real work began. This wasn't victory, it was exposure. Now failure would be visible. Now the idea would face reality. And as the company grew, so did the pressure. Scaling culture is harder than scaling product. Protecting values while expanding is exhausting. Mistakes were made. Stores grew faster than systems. Cash flow tightened. There were moments when bankruptcy felt close enough to touch. But through it all, Schultz returned to the same internal question. Does this still resemble the picture I saw? If the answer was no, he adjusted. If the answer was yes, he endured. This part of the journey isn't cinematic. It's operational, relentless, and it demands something most people underestimate: patience without reassurance. As Starbucks slowly took shape, it didn't explode overnight. It earned trust one location at a time. Customers didn't just buy coffee, they adopted ritual. Employees didn't just work shifts, they identified with the place. And over time, the invisible became obvious. What once sounded impractical became familiar. What once seemed indulgent became daily life. But none of that erased the years of disbelief that came before. Those years mattered, because they hardened the conviction that success isn't about being right early. It's about staying aligned long enough for reality to catch up. Pause here. Let that breathe. Howard Schultz didn't win because he predicted the future. He won because he refused to abandon it when no one else could see it yet. And the cost of that refusal was higher than most people realize. Growth doesn't announce itself as danger. It arrives dressed as opportunity. When Starbucks began to expand under Howard Schultz's leadership, the outside world started changing its tone. The same people who once doubted now leaned in, not with apology, with curiosity. That shift can be intoxicating. Stores were opening. Customers were coming back daily. The brand was starting to mean something. But inside the company, pressure was building. Because growth asks a quiet question every leader eventually faces: how much of what made this special can survive scale? Howard Schultz didn't see Starbucks as a retail operation. He saw it as a living system, a culture, a promise. And promises become fragile when speed enters the room. Every new store required hiring, training, oversight. Every new city introduced different habits, different expectations, different compromises. And every compromise carried a cost. This is where leadership becomes lonely, because success removes excuses. When things are small, flaws are forgivable. When things work, responsibility multiplies. Howard felt that weight. He remembered the people behind the counters, the ones who would never appear in press releases, the ones whose lives would quietly reflect his decisions. So he made choices that many advisors questioned. Healthcare for part-time workers, stock options for employees who didn't hold titles. To Wall Street, it looked inefficient. To accountants, unnecessary. To him, it was non-negotiable, not because it improved morale, but because it aligned with who he was. This is something people misunderstand about values. They're not beliefs you defend. They're standards you absorb costs for, and Starbucks absorbed many. As the company expanded rapidly through the 1990s, cracks began to show. Operations struggled to keep up. Quality became inconsistent. The soul he fought to protect felt diluted. There were mornings when he walked into stores and didn't recognize the atmosphere anymore. The music felt wrong. The interactions felt rushed. He wasn't watching a business fail. He was watching meaning erode, and that hurt more. Eventually, Schultz stepped away from day-to-day leadership, trusting systems to carry the culture forward. That decision made sense on paper. It did not feel right emotionally. Years passed. Starbucks grew larger than ever, financially stronger, globally visible. But something essential faded. Customers noticed. Employees felt it. The experience became transactional. Howard watched from a distance, uneasy. Then came the moment every founder dreads. He returned to Starbucks stores anonymously, sat quietly, observed, and what he saw confirmed his fear. The company had lost intimacy. It wasn't broken, it was hollow. This is where the story takes a turn most people overlook. Howard Schultz didn't reclaim leadership because profits were down. He returned because purpose was. That distinction matters. Coming back meant confronting uncomfortable truths, admitting that expansion had outpaced intention, accepting responsibility for dilution. Leadership at this level isn't about control, it's about correction. He closed underperforming stores, slowed growth, refocused training, moves that alarmed investors, moves that steadied the foundation. This phase wasn't about vision anymore, it was about restraint. Knowing when to pause is harder than knowing when to push. Howard had learned that the hard way, because building something meaningful isn't linear. It loops, it tests, it humbles, and humility was required now more than ambition. He spoke openly to employees about mistakes, not defensively, honestly. Trust isn't rebuilt through slogans, it's rebuilt through behavior. Slowly, Starbucks began to feel like itself again. Not perfect, but intentional. Looking back, Schultz would later acknowledge that the greatest threat to Starbucks wasn't competition. It was forgetting why it existed. That insight didn't come early, it came through pain, through watching success drift from purpose. And that experience reshaped how he understood leadership. Not as dominance, not as certainty, but as stewardship, holding something valuable long enough to pass it forward intact. Pause here. This part of the story matters because it reveals something deeper. Howard Schultz wasn't obsessed with winning. He was obsessed with preserving meaning at scale. That obsession cost him comfort, approval, peace, but it kept the vision alive. There is a moment in every long journey when effort stops feeling noble and starts feeling heavy. Howard Schultz reached that moment quietly. From the outside, Starbucks still looked successful. Stores everywhere, brand recognition, global presence. But internally, the pressure had shifted from growth to survival of identity. This is the stage most stories skip because it's harder to dramatize. There's no single villain, no obvious collapse, just fatigue, the kind that settles into decision-making, the kind that makes you question whether the cost of caring is too high. Howard carried the responsibility of millions of daily interactions he would never witness. Each cup served was a small test of the promise he had made years earlier. And he knew something uncomfortable. Scale amplifies everything, including mistakes. The larger Starbucks became, the easier it was to hide behind systems, processes, metrics. But that was never why people fell in love with it. They didn't come for efficiency, they came for familiarity. Howard understood that culture isn't preserved through rules, it's preserved through attention. And attention is expensive. There were moments when advisors urged simplification, cut costs, standardize more aggressively, reduce emotional investment, in other words, become like everyone else. Those suggestions weren't malicious, they were rational. But rationality without memory can be dangerous. Howard remembered the boy watching his father lose dignity at work. He remembered the cafes in Italy where people felt seen without explanation. Those memories didn't allow him to disengage, so instead of retreating, he leaned in. He made decisions that slowed momentum in the short term, closed stores to retrain staff, refocused on coffee education, actions that confused markets but clarified purpose. This phase required a different kind of courage, not the courage to start, but the courage to protect. Protecting culture isn't loud, it doesn't trend, it often looks like hesitation, but in reality it's discipline. Howard began speaking differently to his teams, less about expansion, more about meaning. He reminded them that Starbucks wasn't built to make people rush faster through their lives. It was built to give them a pause. That idea sounds simple, but simplicity is hard to defend in complex systems. As competition intensified, imitators emerged. Everyone suddenly had premium coffee, stylish interiors, ambiance. What they didn't have was memory. They copied the surface, not the soul. Howard knew that Starbucks' advantage was not innovation. It was intention sustained over time. That's not something you patent, it's something you practice. And practice requires repetition. Showing up to stores, listening to baristas, paying attention to subtle shifts. This wasn't glamorous leadership, it was immersive. And it came with a cost. Public scrutiny increased. Every decision became political. Every stance invited criticism. When Starbucks took positions on social issues, responses were divided. Some praised the courage, others accused the company of overreach. Howard accepted that tension. He believed neutrality was itself a position, and silence a form of consent. These beliefs didn't make his life easier, they made it heavier. But he didn't build Starbucks to be easy to run. He built it to be worth running. As years passed, the company stabilized again, not without challenges, not without mistakes, but with a renewed sense of direction. Howard Schultz eventually stepped aside once more. Not out of exhaustion, but out of readiness. He had learned something crucial. A founder's role is not to stay forever. It's to embed values deeply enough that they outlive you. That realization marked a quiet closure. The boy from Brooklyn, shaped by instability, had built a system designed to offer constancy, not perfection, but care. Pause here, because this is the part most people miss. Howard Schultz didn't succeed because he was always right. He succeeded because he kept returning to the same inner reference point, again and again. When success tempted distraction, when failure invited retreat, when pressure demanded compromise, he asked himself one question: does this still resemble the picture I saw? That question guided him more reliably than any forecast. And it's the question that separates those who build things that last from those who simply grow fast. In the next part, we move toward the end of this journey, not with celebration, but with reflection. Because the real legacy of this story isn't measured in stores or revenue. It's measured in the courage to protect an unseen idea long enough for the world to finally recognize it. When people talk about legacy, they usually imagine something you leave behind. Howard Schultz learned that legacy is something you live with. Long after the headlines fade, long after the applause quiets, you are left with the consequences of your choices, not the intentions, the outcomes. By the time Starbucks had become a global symbol, Howard understood something few leaders admit. Success does not simplify life, it complicates it. Every decision carried more weight than before. Every word echoed further than intended. Every mistake scaled instantly. There were days when he missed obscurity, not because it was easier, but because it was quieter. Quiet allows reflection. Noise demands reaction. Howard resisted becoming reactive. He learned to slow himself down, to question urgency, to differentiate between pressure and importance. This didn't come naturally. It came through fatigue. Years of navigating expectations from shareholders, employees, customers, and critics create a particular kind of weariness, one that sleep doesn't fix. And yet beneath that weariness, something remains steady, a sense of responsibility. Howard never believed Starbucks belonged solely to him or to investors. He believed it belonged to the people who showed up every day, the baristas opening stores before sunrise, the customers who found comfort in routine, the communities that adopted the space as their own. That belief shaped how he thought about power. Power to him wasn't control, it was obligation. That's why stepping away from leadership didn't feel like escape. It felt like trust. Trust that what had been built could endure without constant supervision. Of course, trust is risky. No system perfectly preserves intention. No culture remains untouched by time. Howard knew that. But he also knew something else. If your values only survive under your watch, they were never strong enough. As he transitioned out of active leadership, he spent more time reflecting on the journey rather than directing it. What surprised him most wasn't the scale Starbucks achieved. It was how long it took people to understand what it really was. For years, critics framed Starbucks as indulgent, as overpriced, as unnecessary. And in a narrow sense, they weren't wrong. Coffee can be cheap, space can be minimal, interaction can be optional. But those critiques missed the point. Starbucks was never about necessity. It was about choice. The choice to slow down. The choice to create a small pause in a fast-moving world. The choice to value presence over efficiency. Howard didn't expect everyone to agree with that choice. He only wanted it to exist. That distinction freed him. He no longer needed universal approval. He needed alignment. Looking back, he often spoke about the rejections early in his career. Not with bitterness, with clarity. Those rejections taught him restraint. They forced him to articulate what he believed without external validation. They stripped the vision down to its essence. If Starbucks had been instantly embraced, it might have grown faster, but it would have grown hollow. Resistance sharpened it. There's a quiet irony in that. The very people who doubted the idea helped strengthen it by forcing it to survive without their support. Howard understood that later. At the time, it just hurt. This is something worth sitting with. Not every closed door is an enemy. Some are filters. They ensure that only ideas strong enough to endure skepticism make it through. Howard Schultz didn't succeed because he avoided rejection. He succeeded because he metabolized it. He let it refine his thinking instead of erasing it. And that process took decades. Decades of staying emotionally invested in something the world treated as transactional. That's not common. As his public role diminished, Howard became more reflective, more measured in his words. He spoke less about growth and more about responsibility, less about innovation and more about humanity. He understood that companies don't shape culture through slogans. They shape it through consistent behavior over time. And time was the one thing he had given Starbucks more than anything else. Time to mature, time to correct itself, time to prove that intention can survive scale. Pause here, because this part of the story isn't triumphant. It's sobering. It reminds us that building something meaningful doesn't end with success. It continues through stewardship, and stewardship rarely receives applause. In the final part, we'll step back and look at what this journey ultimately teaches. Not about business, but about belief. When a story runs long enough, it stops being about the person at the center of it. It becomes about what remains when the person steps back. Howard Schultz reached that stage quietly. There was no dramatic farewell. No final speech meant to be quoted forever. He simply began to let go. And letting go, he discovered, was harder than building. Because creation is active, release is vulnerable. For decades, he had been the keeper of a picture most people once rejected. He defended it, protected it, absorbed the cost of holding it steady. Now the question was different. Had that picture become strong enough to survive without him? That question matters more than any valuation. Howard understood that the true measure of his work wasn't the number of stores or the size of revenue. It was whether the idea still lived inside the system. Whether people who never met him could still feel what he once felt in Italy. Whether a barista with no knowledge of his past could still sense that their presence mattered. This is where the story becomes uncomfortable for those looking for formulas. Because there isn't one. Howard Schultz didn't follow a blueprint. He followed an internal compass shaped by experience, memory, and loss. He didn't always choose correctly. He didn't avoid compromise. He didn't escape regret. But he returned, again and again, to the same core belief. That businesses are human institutions before they are economic ones. That belief cost him speed, approval, sometimes peace. But it gave the company something rare, continuity of intention. When people ask what made Starbucks different, they often list features, music, lighting, store design. Those are expressions, not causes. The cause was a refusal to treat people as transactions. That refusal began long before success made it fashionable. It began in a childhood marked by insecurity, in a moment of recognition in a foreign country, in years of rejection that tested commitment more than intelligence. Howard Schultz didn't win because he outworked everyone. He won because he outlasted disbelief. And outlasting disbelief requires a specific kind of strength, not aggression, not confidence, patience. The patience to live inside uncertainty without demanding immediate proof. The patience to be misunderstood without becoming defensive. The patience to protect an idea quietly while others chase visible wins. This patience isn't passive, it's active endurance. As time went on, Howard became less interested in expanding influence and more interested in preserving meaning. He understood that leadership is temporary, but impact can be durable. That understanding softened him. He spoke more carefully, listened more deeply, chose words with awareness of their reach. He knew that once something becomes large, even small explained decisions ripple outward. And so he became more deliberate. Not perfect, but conscious. If there is a lesson here, it isn't that everyone should start a company, or chase scale, or resist every compromise. The lesson is simpler and harder. When you see something clearly that others cannot yet see, you will be asked to abandon it many times. Not always aggressively, often gently, through advice that sounds reasonable, through alternatives that promise safety, through voices that question whether the effort is worth it. Howard Schultz faced those moments repeatedly, and each time he chose alignment over relief. That choice doesn't guarantee success, but without it, success becomes hollow. Take a moment here, because this is where the story turns back to you, not to your goals, not to your ambitions, to your perception. What picture do you carry that feels difficult to explain? What idea feels obvious to you, but impractical to others? What belief keeps resurfacing no matter how often it's dismissed? Those questions aren't asking for action yet. They're asking for honesty. Howard Schultz didn't move forward because he was certain the world would agree. He moved forward because he was certain he wouldn't forgive himself if he didn't try. That distinction matters. At the end of a long life of building, he didn't measure success by applause. He measured it by coherence. Did the work resemble the original intention? For Starbucks, the answer was imperfect but real, and that was enough. This story was never about coffee. It was about believing in a future that doesn't exist yet, and choosing to live as if it does, long enough for others to eventually see it too. Pause. Let that settle. This is the end of episode 3, and the quiet truth behind it is this. The world doesn't change when ideas appear. It changes when someone is willing to stand alone with one, long enough for it to become visible.